messing things up. By the way, since you're an investigator, Draco's pale face suddenly flushed red as he seemed to remember something. Gryffindor's Saint Potter, that legendary Harry Potter, I'm sure you've heard of him. He stood up excitedly, eyes wide, glaring at Amasta. What powers do you have, Brain? Can you expel students? If you can get him out of this school, I can make my father give you a fortune. Amasta was used to this kind of haughty tone. Leaning back in the soft chair, his voice calm and even, he said, If I understand correctly, Mr. Malfoy, you're trying to report that Harry Potter is the heir of Slytherin, yes? I didn't say that, Draco muttered, without noticing that Amasta had stopped smiling. Just some mudblood-loving, self-degrading scum. How could he have anything to do with the great Slytherin? Amasta's expression shifted slightly. Even among pureblood descendants, Draco Malfoy's personality was remarkably distinct. But that doesn't matter. Suddenly turning around, Draco waved his arms angrily. Brain, I just want Potter out of this school. If you need an excuse, I'll tell you. He's a parcel mouth. Surely you know what that means. Ah, Amasta straightened in his seat, his gaze flickering. Snape hadn't mentioned this last night, and if even the Slytherin students knew, Snape had to know as well. You've just given me a rather interesting piece of information, Mr. Malfoy. Amasta nodded toward Malfoy. However, I'm afraid I don't have the authority to expel any student, and unless we can confirm who was responsible for attacking Crivey and Finley, I wouldn't advise Headmaster Dumbledore to expel anyone either. You're not sent by my father. Malfoy's face immediately darkened. He understood now. This man standing before him didn't seem to be on the same side. Then what are you doing here? Malfoy sneered. Do you think I opened the Chamber of Secrets and now you want to send me to Azkaban? In a way, yes, Amasta said with a smile as he straightened up. It's a little embarrassing. Back when I was a student here, I apparently hid something in my dormitory. I don't know why, but I forgot about it until just now. A little provocation jogged my memory. Once Malfoy realized that his orders had no effect on Amasta Brain, his expression grew cold. He had no intention of engaging with him, only wanting to return to finish his letter. Yet, for some reason, when Brain, now carrying the title of investigating officer, politely said goodbye and headed toward the dormitory, Malfoy found himself following closely behind. I have to keep an eye on you, Brain, just in case someone notices missing valuables once school starts. Amasta raised an eyebrow at the unexpected tailing, and Malfoy snarled, I wouldn't trust someone with an unknown background. Your concern is reasonable, Mr. Malfoy. Then I'll ask you to bear witness. Amasta replied calmly, nodding, and ignored him thereafter. Many dorm rooms in each house remained empty. When a student graduated, their room of 7 years would open up, but not always immediately for a new student. Sometimes it stayed vacant for 2 years before being reassigned. This is my dormitory. So when Brain paused in front of the door, Malfoy's face turned as black as ink. Oh, really? Amasta raised his eyebrows. What a fortunate coincidence. It saves me from having to use force to open the door. So, Mr. Malfoy, would you mind lending a hand? Though reluctant, Malfoy's curiosity about the hidden contents of the room got the better of him. Seeing that Amasta didn't seem wealthy, he growled a threat. If you break anything, you'll pay for it. The dorm had changed considerably since Amasta's school days, though the bed's position remained largely the same. He studied it carefully at the door, then walked toward the window. Outside, the black lake shimmered with its perennial silvery green waves, a perfect vantage point. When he first entered Hogwarts, he hadn't lived here. But after the Christmas holiday in 5th year, he had reluctantly moved here at the persistent urging of his dorm mates. The young wizard currently living here must be quite wealthy. Amasta noticed a brand new Nimbus Series broom propped against the headboard, and the bedding was no standard school issue. It was woven and filled with gold thread and the finest velvet. Oh, this is truly extravagant. Amasta surveyed the luxurious items near the bed with interest. He turned to ask whose bed it was, but seeing Malfoy's face darken a few shades, the answer became clear. It seems we are fated to meet, Mr. Malfoy. I can tell right away. You're a fraud, Malfoy said confidently. I've slept in this bed for nearly 2 years and never noticed anything unusual. Perhaps you just weren't observant enough, Mr. Malfoy, Amasta replied. Knowing Malfoy might not be particularly fond of him, Amasta didn't intend to linger. He picked up the broom from the headboard, tossed it to Malfoy, and instructed him to wait by the door. You think I'd steal your things? Not at all, Amasta said, producing his wand from his sleeve. I just need to ensure that the important items I've placed here aren't accidentally taken. The process might make some noise, but don't worry, Mr. Malfoy. I swear on my life that I will keep you safe. Amasta approached Malfoy's luxurious bed, eyes fixed on the rough stone wall. Counting from the window side, he stopped at the 7th brick, staring at the seam between it and the 8th. He waved his wand to slide the bedside table aside and lowered his gaze to the floor, counting 7 bricks out from the inside, roughly a third of the way along the bed. He crouched and traced his arm with his wand. A jet of steaming crimson blood spurted forth, splattering across the dark teal floor tiles. What are you doing? Malfoy frowned in disgust, shuffling over slowly. The magic you're using to protect your things? It looks like dark magic? Once Amasta had healed himself, he focused intently on the floor. The blood spilled onto the stone tiles began to writhe unnaturally, as if affected by some force, burrowing into the ground. Soon, it disappeared completely, and a small, pale gold snake emerged from the center of the tiles, head held high. Don't speak like an amateur, Mr. Malfoy, Amasta teased, pleased that his protective spell had held. I'd almost think you weren't a Slytherin. All right, Mr. Malfoy, Amasta continued. If you don't want to wait outside, prepare yourself. Don't get spooked by what's inside. Malfoy wanted to mock him, but no words came. Suddenly, Amostar Brain seemed a little uncanny. Still, his pride would not allow him to be easily intimidated. After a moment of hesitation, he remained in place. Amasta ignored him, raising his wand toward the small golden snake. As he chanted, the ambient magic thickened, and the already dim room grew darker. Hiss! The snake flicked its tongue and slithered along the seams of the stone tile, moving with the swiftness of a shadow, before returning to its starting position and fading into nothing. After some effort, a streak of light appeared across the dark teal tile. The stone split along the seam and flipped outward, revealing a 2-foot-deep black hole. Seconds passed in silence. Curiosity got the better of Malfoy, and he leaned in. Seeing a small trinket resting on a stone chest at the bottom, his expression stiffened for a moment before breaking into a grin, baring his teeth. So this big fuss was just over a fist-sized spider? He sneered. And it looks like it's dead. Brain, is this some little creature you kept in school? All that effort just to give it a grave? My opinion differs, Mr. Malfoy. I believe this spider is still alive. Amasta stared calmly at the motionless spider atop the stone chest, stepping back. It's likely just been in this dark environment too long. It may need a little stimulation. He waved his wand, summoning a gentle breeze. As he predicted, the spider's fine, bristly legs twitched. Pulling its legs from under its body, it raised its ugly head, 8 green eyes spinning wildly. What? So what? It can... Swish! Before Malfoy could finish, the spider's legs shot out. Its jumping ability was incredible. The fist-sized body leapt onto the ceiling. Then a blur flashed, and the 8-eyed spider, imprisoned for 4 or 5 years, finally restored to its full size. Boom! When the 8-eyed spider hit the floor, the dormitory shook as if the very sky had collapsed. The 2 beds nearest the center were instantly crushed into splinters under its massive body. Clack, clack, clack! The spider, imprisoned by Amasta for 5 or 6 years, frantically snapped its mandibles. If it could speak, Amasta was certain his ancestors going back 18 generations would have been thoroughly insulted. Its boundless rage and fury left it no moment of calm. 2 enormous black pincers flailed wildly in midair, while 6 long, bristly legs supported its hulking frame as it barreled through the room. Within moments, almost everything in the dorm was destroyed, except for Malfoy's bed. Crack! Finally, slightly spent from its tantrum, the spider pinned its 6 legs against the solid stone walls, perching under the ceiling on the far side of the room. All 8 eyes glared down at Amasta, who had tormented it for years. Its grotesque mandibles opened wide, ready for a desperate final strike. Hey there, long time no see, little 8 eyes. Amasta waved his wand-bearing hand. It's good to see you still full of energy. What have you been doing? Malfoy, who had collapsed to the floor in shock, stared blankly at Amasta's forehead, muttering in a dreamlike voice. Suddenly, his pale face flushed crimson as he sprang upright, roaring at Amasta. How dare you hide something like this by my bed? Brain, I'm telling my father about this, and you won't make it to tomorrow without being expelled. Chapter 25 The Polite Malfoy. Faced with Draco Malfoy's impotent fury, Amasta remained calm and collected, shrugging innocently. What a shame. I thought you might find it cute. Who could call such a creature, combining terror, danger, and ugliness, cute? Malfoy wanted to retort, but the spider, which had imagined countless revenge scenarios, had no patience for their chatter. Seeing the powerful wizard who had locked it away turn his gaze slightly aside, it seized what it considered the perfect opportunity for an ambush. Whoosh! The massive creature surged through the air with a terrifying roar, like a horse dragging a carriage. Malfoy's pupils constricted. Time seemed to slow. He opened his mouth, eyes wide, trying to warn Amasta, but his lips moved so slowly that even if he were crushed into a pulp, he wouldn't have been able to utter a single word. Just as Malfoy thought he was doomed, Amasta, acting as if nothing had happened, turned and raised his wand. A faint glow gathered at the tip before it struck like a cleaving blade. Within the room, a delicate, shadowy barrier appeared, thin as a cicada's wing but razor sharp, positioned perfectly in front of the diving spider. The spider's 8 emerald eyes flickered subtly, sensing the danger, and it tried to wedge its legs against the wall to stop its descent. But its earlier leap had been too forceful. In the panic, the massive body's momentum could not be stopped. It raised its black pincers in a futile attempt to shield itself. Crash! A torrential black spray erupted as the spider's body split in two, slamming heavily to the floor. Green innards, intestines, and bodily fluids mixed in a gruesome mess across the room. Malfoy stood behind the milky white barrier Amasta had conjured, staring blankly at the now duplicated spider. The faint clack, clack of the 2 massive black hounds faded in his ears, sounding like the dying wails and final protests of the creatures. His legs trembled involuntarily. Apologies, Mr. Malfoy, for leaving your dorm in such a mess. But don't worry, I'll sort it out shortly, Amasta said, lowering the magical shield. He approached the spider's body, ignoring the lingering hatred in its green eyes. With a few fingers, he prodded its mandibles as if searching for something. After a moment, he shook his head regretfully. I forgot again, I already collected the venom. It seems that lack of food and exercise slows an 8-eyed spider's venom regeneration significantly. Malfoy's body shuddered violently. His gaze shifted to Amasta, who looked like he was begrudgingly digesting too many cookies at afternoon tea and had little appetite for dinner. For the first time, Malfoy truly understood the meaning of fear and power. What kind of magic was that? Malfoy's voice trembled despite his efforts to control it. What? Amasta looked up, feigning surprise. That spell you just used, the one that killed that spider. Oh, Amasta bent down again, searching for any valuable organs, and said casually, I never named it, Mr. Malfoy. If you'd like, you may have the honor. Amasta stood, slightly disappointed, and moved to the stone chest. He didn't rush to retrieve it, instead rummaging through his portable space pouch. Seconds later, he pulled out a glass vial filled with dark green potion. Shh! The otherwise unremarkable stone chest emitted a foul-smelling white vapor the moment the potion touched it, as if it had been superheated and evaporated the potion instantly. Seeing Malfoy shiver violently again, Amasta kindly explained, the chest is protected with both a tracking charm and a lethal potion. Touch it recklessly, and you'll get into serious trouble. Already coated in deadly potion, did it really need a tracking spell too? Malfoy wondered silently but lacked the courage to ask aloud. All right. Amasta picked up the stone chest, his tone relaxed, and swept his wand. The collapsed bed and shredded furniture leapt back into place. Personal items floated back to their original forms. Feathers slid into their mattresses and bedding. Torn books reassembled and returned neatly to the shelves. The enchanted lights on the ceiling glimmered once more. The green blood on robes and sweaters transformed into tiny, writhing figures, twisting back into the spider's belly. A final flick of his wand turned the spider's body into a wisp of smoke. In an instant, the dormitory was clean and comfortable again. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Malfoy, Amasta said cheerfully, tucking the chest under his arm. I assume you won't mind keeping today's events a secret, will you? Malfoy stiffened but nodded mechanically. I'll keep your secret. Mr. Brain? Thank you. Amasta nodded politely and turned to leave. Draco Malfoy remained frozen by his bed, staring at the dormitory. Nothing seemed to remain from what had just occurred. It was as if it had all been a dream. 10 minutes later, he suddenly remembered something. His pale cheeks flushed red. He bolted from the dormitory, raced down the spiral staircase, and entered the common room. Amasta was gone, the space empty. Malfoy grabbed the half-written letter still lying on the table and crumpled it into a ball, tossing it into the fireplace. As the flames rose, he pulled out a fresh sheet of parchment and bent over the desk to write once more. Night fell. Amasta stood outside a long-unused classroom on the third floor. This room, arranged by Professor McGonagall, would serve as his office and bedroom during his tenure at Hogwarts. The house elves had cleaned it immaculately. The air smelled faintly of pleasant musk, with no trace of decay. The furnishings were minimal. Most of the space was empty, with only the back area furnished with a bed, desk, bookshelf, and wardrobe. Anticipating the next 2 or 3 months of harsh cold, the elves had thoughtfully installed a fireplace. Amasta closed the door and stepped into the warm room. The carved windows faced Hagrid's hut and the Forbidden Forest, with a faint view of the Quidditch pitch. On the desk, a candelabra cast a steady glow. Amasta arranged his quills and ink neatly, placing a framed photo of himself with Grandma Felina at the top right corner. In the picture, he was much younger, taken during the summer after fourth year before fifth year started at the photo studio across from the orphanage. At the time, no one could have guessed it would be their last photo together. Nash, Chapter 26, Memories and Horcruxes. On a clear night, the stars sparkled across the sky like countless brilliant silver beads, densely embedded in the black velvet of the night. Yet strangely, the moonlight, which should have been pure and bright, seemed oddly subdued. A faint reddish tint lingered in the misty glow, as if a bloodied hand had lightly brushed across the surface of the moon. A gentle breeze swept from the vast forbidden forest toward the castle, softly pushing open Amasta's window. The reddened moonlight slipped inside, spilling across the deep brown floor of the dormitory in a halo of crimson. On his desk, a stone box lay half open. It seemed to have the power to swallow light. The candlelight that fell inside vanished without a trace. The unopened half of the box remained in darkness, concealing its contents. Amasta leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the thumb-sized glass vial in his hand. Inside, silver mist swirled slowly, like a rotating galaxy. It was a memory, removed from his mind. The memory belonged to Amasta himself, but he had no idea when he had left it behind. Earlier that morning, when Professor McGonagall had encountered Harry Potter, a sudden message had flashed in Amasta's mind. It told him that he had hidden something extremely important beneath the dormitory floor. Once the memory was recovered, it must be retrieved immediately, and the trigger for the message was seeing Harry Potter with his own eyes. Why had he set such a condition back then? Amasta stared at the shimmering silver mist, pondering this. Suddenly, his heart raced as a possibility struck him. Could it be that this memory is related to Harry Potter's story? That all these years I couldn't recall my past life's knowledge of Harry Potter because I deliberately removed this memory? He murmured to himself, but quickly shook his head, dismissing the thought. The greatest advantage of a time traveler was simple, knowing the story in advance. To know the story meant avoiding all dangers ahead of time and gaining every possible advantage. No matter what happened, Amasta believed he would never relinquish such a powerful edge. He could easily merge back into the memory to resolve his doubts, but caution prevented him from attempting it. A memory represents a person's past and experiences. It can even subtly shape one's character. Amasta couldn't be certain whether the message in his mind was something he had left behind or something forcibly implanted by another through memory magic. If it was the latter, the caster might have anticipated that he would retrieve and merge with the memory, and could have embedded false information to mislead him. Of course, anyone capable of forcibly extracting and altering his memories could have simply used magic to control his actions instead of going through such elaborate steps. Still, Amasta could not ignore the possibility. Back in school, he hadn't been nearly as strong as he was now. It wasn't impossible that someone had tried to sabotage him. After much hesitation, he decided to temporarily refrain from merging with the memory. His skill in memory magic wasn't exceptional. If the memory had been altered by a master of memory magic, he might not even notice. Rather than risk it, a wiser choice was to find a memory expert to examine it. Were there masters of memory magic at Hogwarts? Amasta thought of Dumbledore, certainly, but unless he drank 2 full bowls of Felix Felicis in a row, there was no way Dumbledore would take such a reckless risk. Safely tucking the memory vial close, Amasta stood and slid open the stone lid of the box. He quietly observed its contents, the candlelight casting subtle, ambiguous shadows across his face. At the bottom lay a treasure once cherished by Rowena Ravenclaw, one of the 4 founders of Hogwarts, a symbol of intelligence and composure. But now the treasure was covered in blackened, dried scabs, cracked in 2. Ravenclaw's diadem had been lost for 1,000 years. Amasta had no idea how much effort Voldemort had expended to find it, but he was outraged that Voldemort had turned such a precious artifact into a Horcrux. Amasta could imagine the chaos if this artifact surfaced in the magical world. Countless ancient wizards from lineages connected to the 4 founders' magic would have been willing to trade everything they owned to obtain it, even wiping out the wealthiest families, like the Malfoys, to gather enough galleons to purchase it. Here he was, just a step away from achieving financial freedom, yet he had to destroy this opportunity with his own hands. Thinking of it now, a sense of suffocating frustration welled up inside Amasta. Speaking of personally destroying the crown, it's another question worth pondering. Amasta remembered clearly how he had discovered the crown, and he could still sense the lingering aura of deadly fire magic seeping into his own power. Yet his memory of destroying the crown remained hazy. As for why this was the case, the answer likely lay in that tiny vial of memories from earlier. Restore to original. Amasta pointed his wand at the crown. The 2 ancient, faded halves resting in his palm trembled briefly before settling into calm. This was hardly surprising. Although Amasta's deadly fire had dissolved the Horcrux-bound black magic, the crown itself still contained strange, potent magic. Restoring a legendary magical artifact imbued with immense power was never a simple task. Does the crown really possess that extraordinary magic rumored to grant its wearer unimaginable wisdom? Amasta mused. At the very least, Voldemort had clearly never tapped into the crown's full power, otherwise he would never have treated it so carelessly. Better put it away for now, Amasta said to himself. Perhaps another day I can try using some adhesive to piece it together. Maybe those eccentric secret magic practitioners wouldn't notice. Outside, the chill clashed with the warm indoor air, sending gusts rattling the open window. Amasta closed it and, with his keen eyes, spotted an oil lamp swaying its way from the forbidden forest toward Hagrid's hut. It must be Hermione Granger letting Hagrid know that I've returned to Hogwarts as an investigator. But perhaps the message got twisted and he thinks it's the Ministry. Something's off. Amasta frowned, recalling the morning encounter. Hagrid had seemed unusually anxious about the news. But why? Did he think the Ministry had sent Amasta to cause trouble for Dumbledore? Or could he have some knowledge, or even direct involvement regarding the Slytherin chamber? Amasta pursed his lips, his gaze deepening on Hagrid's hut. After a moment's thought, he turned to the tower nearby where candlelight still flickered, shaking his head. Just as Professor Snape had said, Dumbledore might not be as noble as people believed, but he would never allow harm to come to Hogwarts students. His trust in Hagrid alone was proof that Hagrid was not a suspect. The headmaster should be collecting the Dark Lord's Horcruxes by now, Amasta muttered, drawing the curtains and walking back. If he's willing to recover damaged Horcruxes, I could offer a fair price in consideration of Professor Snape's favor. Chapter 27. The Heavenly Net. Time at Hogwarts passed peacefully and comfortably, far different from life outside, where Amasta had felt like a wound-up puppet constantly running to make ends meet. Before he realized it, 2 weeks had flown by, and tomorrow would be the first day of the second term. Usually, Hogwarts only held a welcome feast the night before the start of a school year, celebrating new students and the new term. The second term typically began quietly, without festivities. But this year was different. Following the terrifying attacks of the previous term, Dumbledore had decided unusually to hold a feast in the Great Hall to lift spirits. Professor Snape strode down the third-floor corridor. Nearby students quickly moved aside at the sight of the cold, formidable potions master, wary of crossing him. Snape was used to such reactions. He ignored the students and rounded several corners, stopping in front of a long, unused classroom. Please, come in, Professor Snape. The voice from inside made Snape pause mid-knock. Obeying, he pushed the door open and found Amasta standing at the center of the classroom, arms folded, smiling at a wall. Has Headmaster Dumbledore sent you to invite me to the feast? Snape closed the door behind him, a sarcastic tone in his voice. I see, like our great headmaster, you've become nearly omniscient, Amasta. I saw you leaving Dumbledore's office and coming straight here, Amasta replied. I guessed. Amasta raised an eyebrow, pointing toward the wall, a hint of pride in his expression as he showed off his handiwork. Take a look at the results, Professor Snape. I spent several sleepless nights running all over the castle under the disillusionment charm, and I finally finished calibrating all the feeds the day before school started. If I may judge for myself, the effect is excellent. Snape ignored Amasta's self-praise and instead focused on the wall, divided into hundreds of small panels, each flickering with its own image. He studied it carefully, and even he, seasoned by countless storms and crises, couldn't help the faint change in his expression. In the panels, Harry and Ron were walking out of the hospital wing, on their way to inform Hermione about the evening's party and to ask if she planned to attend. Crabbe and Goyle were waiting by the owlery for Draco Malfoy, who soon emerged, feathers stuck all over his hair. He grumbled as he clutched a letter in one hand and tossed an owl onto a beam with the other, prompting laughter from Crabbe and Goyle and a smug grin from Malfoy himself. Near the statue of the hunchbacked witch on the fourth-floor corridor, a thin, curly-haired boy was feeding information to someone. He whispered something to the statue, which opened, and two identical red-haired boys climbed out, high-fiving their friend and showing off butterbeer they had bought at the Three Broomsticks. Filch had just caught two first-years trying to sneak dung pellets into the bathrooms. Dragging them toward his office, he passed Percy reprimanding Sally Ann Perks, who had used a leg locker curse on Padma Patil, causing her to fall into a puddle outside the second-floor bathroom. Filch promptly seized Sally Ann by the collar as well. Meanwhile, Neville carried a bubblehead charm gift from Uncle Argy to Professor Sprout's office, while Professor McGonagall, standing by her office door, glared as a golden-haired, cheerful wizard in a turquoise robe passed by. These flickering images displayed Hogwarts' current happenings with startling clarity. Snape's gaze followed each movement and conversation. When his eyes returned to Amasta, smiling knowingly, his face changed. Indeed, Amasta had told him the plan the very night he returned to school. But Snape had not taken his pupil's fanciful scheme seriously at the time. Now, seeing Hogwarts laid out so vividly before him, he realized just how impressive it was. How did you manage this? Snape asked, his voice dropping instinctively, his eyes betraying a hint of awe. I know you set up many little devices around the castle. How did you prevent them from being discovered? Simple, Amasta said casually. I placed disillusionment charms and powerful anti-tamper spells on all the Omniview scopes. The students won't notice them, and even professors wouldn't find them unless they searched deliberately. Indeed, there was no way to notice them. Unlike ordinary magical observation, these devices caused no awareness in the observed. Snape considered himself vigilant, yet he had felt nothing during his entire walk through the castle. The principle is actually quite simple, like the WN Wizard wireless network. It transmits signals via magical fields. The difference is, mine transmits images, while the WWN transmits sound. Amasta shrugged as if he had merely brewed a simple potion for first years to cure boils. Speaking casually to Snape, he explained, the biggest challenge was Hogwarts' chaotic and powerful magical field, which disrupted signal stability. I spent an entire afternoon adjusting interference spells and calibrating the scopes according to the varying magical strength in different parts of the castle. It exhausted me. Honestly, next time I see Dumbledore, could you ask him if he might approve some overtime pay? Speaking of Dumbledore, Snape's face turned ashen, his expression uncertain. Does he know about all this, Amasta? Amasta didn't answer. He had spotted Percy Weasley, with the signature red hair of his family, sneaking into the Ravenclaw Tower basement during patrol, moving suspiciously. He went to the wall to check, finding the corresponding panel near the window. On the screen, Percy was embracing and passionately kissing a beautiful girl with long, curly brown hair. Tsk, Amasta murmured. Being a prefect is really convenient. If only I had been one back then. Well, never mind. I didn't have a girlfriend anyway. Amused, he then addressed Snape's question. Maybe he knows. Maybe he doesn't. I'm not entirely sure. Professor, my return to Hogwarts didn't get the reaction I expected from the headmaster. I thought he would watch me closely, but he barely paid attention. Do you know why? Chapter 28. The start of term feast night had fallen, and young witches and wizards, along with the professors, gradually gathered from all corners of Hogwarts toward the Great Hall. The enchanted ceiling reflected a dazzling starry sky above. Beneath it, the 4 long tables teemed with bustling students, excitedly sharing stories of their Christmas holidays. For a moment, the lingering unease from last term's attacks seemed to vanish completely. Harry quietly exhaled in relief. His greatest fear was being the center of everyone's attention, with all eyes on him, pointing and whispering. At the faculty table, most professors had already taken their seats. Dumbledore sat in his usual spot, while Professor Lockhart chattered endlessly to Professor McGonagall about the flood of fan letters he had received over the holidays. McGonagall shot Dumbledore a sharp glare, clearly exasperated, but Dumbledore pretended not to notice. Harry suppressed a smile at the amusing scene, but when he noticed the empty seat beside Professor Snape, his expression tightened. He guessed at a possibility he did not want to believe. Meanwhile, Ron was chatting with his twin brothers. You came back so early, but why haven't I seen you all day? He asked. Oh, dear little Ronnie has learned to pry? Fred raised an eyebrow at him. By the way, why didn't the know-it-all show up for the feast? Harry quickly nudged Ron under the table, fearing he might say too much. That's none of your business, Fred, Ron replied irritably. And look at little Ronnie keeping secrets now. George chimed in, giving his brother a jab. With that, the twins' attention moved elsewhere. Harry sensed someone watching him uneasily. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Neville hesitating, clearly concerned. Harry immediately understood Neville's worry, but he couldn't reveal that Hermione was still in the infirmary, recovering from the dark magic on her face. He quickly lowered his head, pretending to be absorbed in the silver spoon on his plate. I don't know, Draco. I hadn't enrolled yet at the time. At the Slytherin table, Malfoy leaned past Goyle and Daphne to question Marcus Flint, whose appearance was almost troll-like. But Flint was visibly impatient. I did hear about it later. Apparently, it involved him, but Dumbledore tightly controlled the details. The Gryffindor team wouldn't reveal a word. Frankly, I don't think they knew much either. They were carried back by the professors that night. During the Christmas holidays, Flint had tried out for the Luxembourg Quidditch team, but failed. Given his academic record, this meant he would likely have to follow his family's orders after graduation, ending up as a low-ranking, overlooked ministry employee. Students trickled into the hall and quickly filled the 4 long tables. The room buzzed like hundreds of Cornish pixies had been let loose. Many students craned their necks, staring eagerly at the faculty table, silently demanding that dinner begin. Ah, here he comes. Snape heard Dumbledore mutter softly. Looking up, he saw Amasta striding quickly through the entrance hall, heading toward the faculty table. Sorry, everyone. I completely lost track of time, Amasta murmured apologetically. The professors smiled at him. Professor McGonagall had already informed them about the new security presence in the castle, and over the past 2 days, Amasta had visited most of them individually, except for Lockhart, who had returned to school last. Sit down, Amasta, Professor Flitwick called in his sharp voice. The students are starving. Do you want to say a few words, Amasta? Dumbledore asked with a gentle smile, twirling his silver beard. No, thank you, Headmaster. I'm not a professor, Amasta replied politely, declining. Within moments, the long tables were piled high with delicious food. The hall filled with the cheerful clatter of plates and utensils, like a lively musical accompaniment. Of course, the appearance of harmony belied the reality. Amasta could feel over 100 eyes fixed on him. 5 minutes into the meal, nearly every student knew the name of the handsome young wizard sitting beside Professor Snape. The information had spread through the upper year students, all of whom had spent time with Amasta during his school days. But regarding Amasta's legendary exploits as a student, rumors and speculation ran wild. Some say that on a night before the fifth-year Christmas break, Amasta sneaked into the Forbidden Forest and set a massive fire, only to get trapped in it himself. Had it not been for the Gryffindor Quidditch team training their maneuvers nearby, he likely would have perished. Others claim it was actually the Gryffindor team who set the fire, and Amasta was the one who saved them. Both versions had their supporters, and neither could convince the other. Malfoy kept his head down, focusing on the lamb chops on his plate, ignoring the debate entirely. After all, his father had warned him sharply in a letter, never provoke Amostar Brain. Lucius Malfoy knew exactly who had brought Amasta into Hogwarts. Malfoy had surely heard of Carcus Flea's reputation. With a little imagination, he could guess where Amasta had come from. Very few wizards from that place had clean hands. Even without his father's warning, Draco Malfoy wouldn't dare antagonize Amasta. That afternoon in the dorm had already given him nightmares for half a month, each time vividly replaying the eight-eyed spider split neatly in two, its innards scattered across the floor. Come on, Harry, can I tell those stories? Of course, Ron, but if you tell them and he holds a grudge, or worse, retaliates, remember to visit me in Azkaban if I get locked up. During the Christmas break, Harry, Ron, and Hermione had agreed not to reveal to anyone what they had learned from Hagrid about Amasta Breen's past. Because whether Mr. Breen had been sent by the Ministry or the Hogwarts Board, his purpose at Hogwarts was to find the heir of Slytherin. And since Harry was the most suspicious candidate in everyone's eyes, he tried to avoid doing anything that might upset Mr. Breen. For Ron, though, it was torturous. Opportunities to take the spotlight didn't come often. 10 minutes later, the students' private discussion shifted from, "Who is he?" to, "What is he here to do?" Maybe Defense Against the Dark Arts is finally going to burn through 2 professors in a single year? Millicent Bulstrode, who had dueled Hermione in wandless dueling lessons under Lockhart, shook her thick chin and laughed harshly. Her joke sparked a wave of laughter along the Slytherin table, though the main target was still Professor Gilderoy Lockhart. Most Slytherins had long seen through his flashy, story-spinning facade. Malfoy shrugged and quickly cast a glance at Amasta, who was talking to Dumbledore at the staff table, then dropped his head, pretending not to know the laughing students around him. "You seem a bit off tonight, Draco," Pansy Parkinson, sitting on his other side, tilted her head to observe his unusually quiet behavior. "Shut your mouth, Pansy!" Malfoy snapped without looking at her, his voice sharp. "Unless you want to end up neatly cut in half, too." "They seem quite taken with you, Amasta." Dumbledore shook his silver beard, now speckled with thick mushroom soup, and glanced at Amasta, tackling a sausage with a smile. "They're simply curious about a stranger who appeared out of nowhere, Headmaster," Amasta replied politely, careful not to say too much in Dumbledore's presence. One wrong word could be trouble. Dumbledore didn't mind his deliberate restraint and continued speaking warmly. "Severus told me you haven't rested properly for several nights. I want to thank you, Amasta, for the efforts you've made to keep the children safe." Amasta smiled humbly, but Dumbledore continued. "Though I am very old, Amasta, I am fortunate not to be a rigid old man. You are right. Ensuring the safety of the children is of utmost importance." Professor McGonagall, sitting to Dumbledore's left and listening closely, pursed her lips, clearly displeased. "I consider it a brilliant idea, Amasta. I mean the alchemical devices you set up in the office. While there are claims they invade the students' privacy," Dumbledore finally spoke diplomatically, expressing his attitude toward Amasta's surveillance system. "Thank you for your understanding, Headmaster. If you like, once the Chamber of Secrets attacks are resolved, I can relocate that monitoring system to your office." Amasta nodded gratefully. Chapter 29. Unexplainable. Amasta silently thought that having this kind of personal surveillance was far more effective than monitoring the school through portraits, though he never said it aloud. They exchanged a few more pleasantries. Dumbledore asked that Amasta make an effort to be around more often, to interact with the students. "The children are eager to get to know you, Amasta." With that polite, modest request, their conversation ended. "Treachery," Amasta murmured under his breath as he withdrew his gaze. Severus Snape, sitting expressionless between Amasta and Dumbledore, darkened slightly at the remark, clearly aware of whom it had been directed toward. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the faculty table, Lockhart, who had failed to catch any of the conversation but was desperate to participate, cast a few furtive glances at Amasta, picking up his silver fork. For some inexplicable reason, he suddenly felt a faint, uneasy sense of danger. The start of term feast ended with one of Dumbledore's awkward, cringe-inducing jokes. Students dispersed in small clusters, still puzzled over the real reason for Amasta's return to Hogwarts. It was clear that the first week of term would unfold as a sprawling detective campaign. Amasta had left before the students, fully aware that his return to Hogwarts was not for a vacation. The moment all the students were gathered in the Great Hall, his mission officially began. From then on, until he located the secret chamber, his schedule would be inverted: sleep by day, work by night. These would be grueling days. In the surveillance room, Amasta sat in his chair, eyes fixed on the monitors gradually filling with students. He focused on those who isolated themselves, watching for behavior that deviated from the norm. Of course, Professor Lockhart was also under his scrutiny. The secret chamber never appeared at expected times. It only opened when Lockhart was teaching defense against the dark arts. Naturally, this drew Amasta's suspicion. After the feast, most students were to their common rooms under the guidance of prefects. Yet, around 10 students slipped away unnoticed. Most of them were Gryffindors. Harry and Ron headed to the infirmary. The Weasley twins, taking advantage of Filch's patrol, sneaked into the passage leading to the Hufflepuff common room underground. They paused before a fruit still life hanging on the stone wall, manipulated it briefly, and slipped inside. Amasta also noticed Penelope Clearwater entering the Ravenclaw common room, only to return shortly afterward. Around the same time, Percy Weasley left the Gryffindor common room, suggesting another passionate rendezvous somewhere in the castle was imminent. Apart from Professors McGonagall and Lockhart staying late in their offices, most professors remained in the staff dormitories. Before entering his office, Dumbledore playfully winked from 30 feet away down the hallway as if greeting someone. Amasta pursed his lips and shifted his gaze from the screen. Nothing unusual occurred. Everything proceeded normally, which was exactly what Amasta expected. Unless luck favored him extraordinarily, he knew not to expect results in a week or two. The fire in the intricately carved fireplace roared. Amasta leaned back in his chair, sipping bitter hot tea, his eyes sweeping the entire wall with calm precision. About half an hour later, the figures on the surveillance screen changed from human forms to ghosts. Amasta watched Peeves, wearing his comically oversized hat, mischievously dash into a long-abandoned second-floor restroom. Moments later, water began to seep from the restroom doorway into the corridor outside. The long night had only just begun, yet Amasta was already feeling restless. He went to his desk and pulled out a copy of his work in progress, Basic Models of Spells and Structural Optimization, flipping through it casually, searching for inspiration. Suddenly, the lower right corner of the monitoring screen flickered. Professor Lockhart emerged, wearing a reddish-purple robe and carrying a stack of books. His face was all smiles, every bit the charming showman, and judging by the direction he was heading, it seemed he was making straight for Amasta's office. Since their offices were on the same floor, it took less than 2 minutes for Lockhart to appear outside Amasta's door. Tap! Tap! The moment the knock sounded, Amasta swung his wand. A massive black curtain unfurled, covering the wall, while his chair scampered back to the desk like it was performing a tap dance. Once he was properly seated, everything returned to normal. Professor Lockhart? Amasta opened the door, feigning just the right amount of surprise. What brings you here? He led the slightly confused Lockhart inside, poured him a cup of tea, though the older wizard didn't seem inclined to drink it. Well, actually, Lockhart began, but when his eyes fell on a copy of Wandering with Werewolves on Amasta's shelf, his grin brightened excessively. My mistake, Amasta. I should have realized, but I didn't. A cunning, devoted admirer, wasn't it? Truly unexpected. He waggled his eyebrows at the flustered Amasta. Apologies, Professor Lockhart. Perhaps I'm just too slow-witted to understand exactly what you mean. No need to hide it any longer, Amasta. You went to great lengths to get into Hogwarts just to be near me, didn't you? Lockhart laughed heartily. Professor McGonagall told me the board sent an investigator for the Chamber of Secrets. I imagine you must have spent quite a bit to pull this off. Amasta glanced toward his bookshelf and blinked. If you mean wandering with werewolves, well, I had a bit of a disagreement with a pack of werewolves back then. To understand them better, I sought out a few of the most well-known books on the subject. Aha! Finally caught you, haven't I? Lockhart beamed as though he'd just uncovered a secret. Just like second-year Miss Granger, who knows me inside out, everyone talks about my calm bravery when trapped by werewolves in a phone booth. But you're different, Amasta. You wanted to learn how I reconciled with them, didn't you? An hour later, Lockhart left Amasta's office, clearly satisfied. At the door, he lowered his voice. No need to worry about reporting to the board, Amasta. The chamber attacks won't happen again. And you know why, don't you? He winked. Because I'm here. Amasta watched him go, then closed the door and returned to his desk, staring at the gift Lockhart had left. A full set of beautifully bound, signed books. Ah, what an amusing fellow. Amasta laughed to himself. Back on the night he returned to Hogwarts, Amasta had discussed suspicious individuals at the school with Professor Snape. When Lockhart's name came up, Snape's disdain and sarcasm were clear, but he never considered Lockhart a serious threat. Amasta had found that puzzling. Still, as a well-known author in the wizarding world, he's at least a fairly friendly wizard. People like Lockhart with such distinct personalities are especially tricky to write. Chapter 30, Chain Reaction. The first week of school flew by amid a swirl of rumors. Now Harry was once again subjected to the same kind of attention he'd received last year after accidentally revealing his Parseltongue ability in Lockhart's dueling class. Wherever he went, he could feel eyes on him, watching and whispering furtively. Some of those glances carried sympathy, others schadenfreude. Even within Gryffindor, the same curious, judging eyes followed him. Of course, Harry wasn't too surprised. Since Monday night, when Seamus had told him that Ernie Macmillan of Hufflepuff had finally gotten the details from Professor Sprout about what Amostar Brain had been doing at the start of term feast, he had already anticipated the fallout. During the last term, garlic, protective charms, and talismans had briefly been all the rage for warding off evil, and now they were back in style. At least this time, the only consolation was that Neville hadn't draped his purple crystal necklace around his neck. The person Harry disliked the most remained Draco Malfoy. After potions on Wednesday afternoon, Harry stormed toward the classroom door, still fuming over his D on the homework, only to find Crabbe and Goyle blocking his way. With their massive frames, no one could have forced past them. Harry spun around, glaring at Draco, who was perched atop his desk with a sly grin. Get your two idiot lackeys out of my way, Malfoy, unless you want to see them chopped into pieces and stuffed into jars. Malfoy's smile twisted into something even more sinister, his inexplicable look of pity only fueling Harry's rage. Speaking of being chopped into pieces, Potter. Malfoy tilted his chin, dragging out his words in that familiar mocking drawl. I'm starting to feel a little sorry for you, Potter. I thought your worst fate would be spending the rest of your life as a neighbor to Dementors in Azkaban. But now, well, I can't guarantee anything. Maybe someone will slice you into bits and use you as fertilizer for Professor Sprout's mandrakes. He's been threatening people like that all the time lately, Harry, Neville whispered beside him, face flushed. At lunch, he said the same thing to me in the Great Hall. And you actually let Malfoy walk out alive, Neville? Incredible, Ron fumed, turning pale. He yanked his taped-up wand from his pocket, pointing it at Malfoy. Want to see who becomes fertilizer first, Malfoy? 20 points from Gryffindor, plus 2 days detention, Weasley. Snape, tidying up at the podium and ignoring the escalating confrontation, lazily approached Ron, fixing him with a sharp gaze. Hopefully this teaches you a lesson, Weasley. In my classroom, wands are not to be pointed at fellow students. The incident left Harry in a foul mood for several days. Even during Quidditch practice, he was off his game. Given his absence from last year's final, Wood was particularly worried. If you want to catch the culprit and prove yourself innocent, Harry, could you wait until after the final before starting your plan? You shouldn't say that to him, Wood. It's not his fault. On Sunday night in the infirmary, Harry relayed Wood's words to Hermione, who exploded in anger. You can't blame him like that either, Hermione, Harry tried to reason. Fred and George said Wood wants to join the Puddlemere United team after graduation. Winning the House Cup is huge for him, and this year or next is his last chance. Ron, ever fair-minded, added his defense for Wood, which only deepened Harry's guilt. But he can't blame you for not being able to win, Harry. Why can't he look at his own shortcomings? Hermione fumed, arms crossed. Ron shrugged, wisely keeping silent. They all knew that as long as the Slytherin heir remained unidentified, Harry's situation was unlikely to improve, and that was precisely the hard part. Otherwise, the school board wouldn't have gone to the trouble of assigning someone to oversee the matter. Hermione had shed most of the cat-like covering that had concealed her appearance, no longer hiding from her reflection. She swung her legs out from under the covers, brows furrowed, pacing her room, racking her brain for a way to help Harry alleviate the misunderstandings surrounding him. Voices of Gryffindor students, Neville, Ginny, the Patils, and Lavender, drifted from outside. They were negotiating with Madame Pomfrey, hoping to be allowed in to visit Hermione. The rumors about the attack and her petrification still hadn't been cleared up. Madame Pomfrey, however, firmly refused. Hermione watched the door, her expression softening. No matter what, she felt deeply touched by the concern of her friends. Maybe we could try asking Mr. Breen for help. Hermione stared at the doorknob for a long moment. For some reason, Amostar Brain, whom she had only met briefly, suddenly came to mind. Putting aside interhouse biases, she realized she actually liked the young wizard. Polite, considerate, and courteous. "Are you insane, Hermione?" Ron puffed out his cheeks in disbelief. "Have you forgotten? Harry's current situation was caused by that very investigator." "That's not his fault, Ron." "That's," Hermione said firmly. "Mr. Breen was only following the orders of the Board of Governors to investigate the Chamber of Secrets. That's his duty. It doesn't mean he's deliberately targeting Harry, does it?" She looked pleased with herself as she watched the two boys fall silent, lost in thought. Then she turned to Harry, who was frowning, and pressed on. "So, Harry, to your knowledge, has Mr. Breen taken any concrete action?" "That's the problem, Hermione," Ron answered for him. "Everyone thinks our investigator would launch some unprecedented operation, ordering a castle-wide search, interrogating every Slytherin student, that kind of thing. But so far, he hasn't done anything. He just stays in his office, like he came back to Hogwarts for a vacation. Honestly, Hagrid must have gotten something wrong. Maybe it wasn't him who defeated Bill and Charlie." Harry added, his expression troubled. "Fred and George told us that Mr. Breen never goes out at night. During the day, he only occasionally heads to the kitchen to get something to eat and take care of hygiene issues." Hermione was genuinely surprised. She stood at the foot of the bed, brow furrowed, lips pressed together like McGonagall catching a Gryffindor student wandering at night. "Fred and George are monitoring Mr. Breen? I mean, they have classes during the day. How can they keep track of him so thoroughly?" "I asked, but they wouldn't tell me." Ron huffed. "Fred said it's their secret to success." "Humph. Apart from avoiding Filch, I don't see what else they've achieved." Ron's assessment wasn't entirely fair. At least, Harry thought, Fred and George excelled at keeping everyone entertained. Their occasional joke products were hugely popular among younger students. The conversation about how Fred and George were monitoring Mr. Breen had drifted far from the original topic, and was never going to yield a clear answer. At 8 o'clock, Madame Pomfrey hurried in and shooed them out. On the way back to the Gryffindor common room, Ron complained non-stop about Hermione refusing to share her potions homework. Harry was used to it. As a rule, Hermione never let them copy a single word before completing her own work. "If you could clear your name with Mr. Breen, Harry," Hermione had said earlier, "given the current situation, if he helps you explain things in his capacity as an investigator, it might even be more effective than anything Dumbledore could say." Standing before the fat lady's portrait and remembering Hermione's warning, Harry hesitated. Chapter 31. Announcement. The first morning of the second week started with a chorus of yawns. Professor Snape's potions assignments clearly troubled more than just one or two students. Last night, the Gryffindor common room had been packed with second years working late into the night. No one wanted to risk detention in the first month of school. Before Harry and Ron had returned to the dormitory, yawning endlessly, Neville had been crouched by the fireplace, looking miserable as he struggled with a 5-foot-long essay. He hadn't even noticed his robe catching fire until his toad Trevor bit him sharply on the ear, saving him from being roasted alive. In short, Neville hadn't slept much at all. So this morning, Seamus and Dean had spent nearly 10 minutes trying to wake him. By the time he made it down the spiral staircase, he had rolled right into the common room in front of everyone. I'll talk to Professor Snape, Mr. Lombarton, and make sure he takes things step by step. Neville's pitiful state even softened the usually strict Professor McGonagall. During Transfiguration that morning, when she discovered why Neville was wearing a scorched robe, sporting 2 dark rings under his eyes, and had clear bite marks on his ears, she had taken a deep breath and said nothing further. Neville's little misadventure briefly distracted everyone from the fact that the school now had an official investigator. But such luck could not last forever. Oliver Wood, meanwhile, would not let a bit of cold weather or drizzling rain slow his path to victory. His training regimen had started the first week of the second term and continued at an intense 4 sessions per week up until the finals. You all know it. Slytherin's going to be tough this year. Wood shouted to the team, broom in hand, battling the wind. We're in for a brutal final. Of course, if Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw knock us out early, just pretend I never said a word. Someone please get Oliver to calm down. Katie Bell, a 5th-year teammate, almost slid off her broom trying to dodge a rogue quaffle George had launched. She screamed in frustration. My robes are soaked, and I've been feeling unwell these past few days. Maybe you could ask Harry for help, Katie. George zoomed over, laughing as he passed her overhead. Just have him release his servant from the chamber. I bet if Flint and Malfoy get turned to stone, Wood will feel a lot better. George's comment sparked a round of laughter, and Harry couldn't help but chuckle along. Harry! Harry! Ron came rushing from the castle toward the pitch. He had been playing wizard chess with Seamus in the common room, but news Neville had brought interrupted his leisure. What is it, Ron? Under Wood's near-devouring gaze, Harry piloted the Firebolt 2000 to the edge of the pitch. Seeing Ron's pale face, he immediately knew something bad had happened. Go check the entrance hall, Harry, right now! Ron grabbed Harry and started running toward the castle, leaving no time for excuses. The rest of the team, thinking another attack was underway, followed one by one, leaving only Wood alone hovering in the air. By the time they reached the entrance hall, a crowd had gathered, murmuring over the newly posted notice on the bulletin board. Seeing Harry approach, the crowd instinctively parted. Ernie and his Hufflepuff friends, along with Susan Bones, gave him unreadable glances. Percy's expression was serious, and Ginny, standing behind him, clutched her chest, her face pale as death. For you, Weasley, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, isn't it? At the front stood Draco Malfoy, his 2 loyal lackeys holding the prime positions for him. Seeing Harry drenched and pale with Ron beside him, Draco's grin turned malicious. This is your only chance in life to afford yourself a new wand. Are you really going to give it up? Back off, Malfoy. Whatever I do isn't your business, Ron snapped. Perhaps noticing that the Gryffindor team outnumbered him, Malfoy signaled Crabbe and Goyle to step aside, giving him a clear view of Harry, who finally understood what had caused such a commotion. The bulletin board bore a new public notice large enough to cover every other flyer: second-hand spell books for sale, periodic filch reminders, Chocolate Frog trading notes, lost and found postings. Beneath it, a massive signature in red ink. Open quote. To all students and staff at Hogwarts, in light of the ongoing unresolved attacks, the safety of all personnel and property cannot be guaranteed. With the approval of Headmaster Albus Dumbledore and Deputy Headmistress Minerva McGonagall, students who possess any information regarding the chamber attacks are encouraged to report it to the board-appointed investigator. Verified and valid information will be rewarded with 200 galleons in cash. Amostar Brain, close quote. Harry's face went pale, as if 1,000 Cornish pixies were screaming in his ears. This is how the board's prized investigator operates. Huh? Fred muttered under his breath, equal parts mocking and outraged, encouraging everyone to snitch on each other. Brilliant strategy, really. Ginny looked like she was about to burst into tears at any moment, and Neville's quiet warning only made Harry's stomach sink. He could feel danger practically radiating from her. Filch went straight to the third floor as soon as he saw the notice. Harry, you need to be careful. Harry didn't need Neville to explain what careful meant. He could almost predict what Filch would